Welcome to the Newton tutorial series. I'm Mike Cruz with AC Tech, and in this tutorial I'm going to discuss the particle and cluster library files. So the clusters and the particle sets are both saved in the same library, and that library is saved with each specific input file that you create. So when I save an input file, it saves that library with that input file. And similarly, when I open up an input file, it's going to recall the library that was associated with that input file. However, when I open up a new instance of Newton, when I start up Newton, Newton will always load the default library file, which is stored in the Newton installation directory. However, we give you the ability to save one other library as the user library. So let's say I have a library that I really like. This is just the default library, but if I really like this library or if I had made changes to it, I could save that as the user library. And what it does is it saves that library in your documents folder. There's a folder in there. I'll open it up here. There's a folder in there under Michael My Documents Newton that saves update information, your configuration file, and your user Newton library file. So that means that now whenever I'm working in Newton, I could be working in any input file that I want. If I say open user library, it's going to recall that library file and replace the current library with that one, which is kind of handy if you have a library that you like to use. Alternatively, you can simply go ahead with any library that you're working with. You could certainly save it just as a library file. Go ahead and overwrite an external library. So rather than having to save the entire input file, maybe I just wanted to work with that library and create a new library. So I can go ahead and save it there. Similarly, in this input file, I can go ahead and open any library that I want. So I can open this other lumps library file. Because maybe for this particular simulation, maybe I wanted to work with this lumpy set. So now what if I wanted to incorporate those lumps into that default library, or what if I wanted to incorporate those lumps into any library file? If I open up my user library again, there are no lumps in this file, but I want that particle set. So the way I would do it is you go to Library, Merge, Export Library Files. So what I have here now is a separate window. On the left-hand side, I have the internal clusters that belong to this input file, and I have the internal particle sets that belong to this input file. On the right-hand side, you have the clusters and the particle sets that belong to some external library file. Right now it's empty because I haven't opened an external library file. So what I would do is I'd say, okay, open library. This is going to allow me to open up an external file. I'm going to open up my lumps. And as soon as that loads in a second here, we see that on my right hand side we've populated our particle sets and clusters. And that very first particle set we were looking at was this tombstones one. So what I would say is, well, take tombstones and bring it over. And you can see at the top it added 4 clusters to my internal library along with this particle set, because it said, well, I know I need to bring these particles along with the particle set. So if I close this window, now I look in here and there's my tombstones right there. If I look in my cluster creator, I went ahead and that imported those 4 clusters right there. So there's that 1, 2, 3, 4. And those are the ones that are in this particle set. So what else can I do in this merge or export window? Maybe I had wanted to actually just save those tombstones just to its own little file. Maybe I just want to export one library file that has just tombstones with these 4 clusters. I can take those out of my internal library and ship them to an external library. So now this external library doesn't exist yet. Right now I've just said, okay, I want to move these ones and these particle sets and these clusters to the external library. If I try and close this window, it's going to say, hey, you modified that external library. Do you want to save it, or do you just want to throw it away? Well, sure, why don't we go ahead and save that? I can save it as tombstones. So now I saved it. As soon as it saves in a moment here, and it automatically finished closing that. So, oh no, never mind, no it didn't, because I just clicked save. Now I go ahead and close that, and if I want, we could go ahead and open that tombstones library. So I'll give this a second to open up, and we can see the only particle library, the only particle set here is that tombstones particle set, and there's only 4 clusters in here. go ahead and open our user library again. What else can we do? Well, we have already discussed importing particles and clusters. We've discussed exporting particles and clusters and merging particles and clusters. I guess all that's left is to discuss these two checkboxes down here. So you pretty much never ever need to change these checkboxes. So the point here is, well, let's go ahead and open my default particle library file. So it's going to open up the same file that I have open right here. Anytime. There we go. So what if I wanted to import this chain link particle set? Well, I already have one called chain link here, so it's going to bark at me for that. But it's also going to look and see that, hey, we've got the same clusters in this set as that set. So if I try and import this, it says, hey, a cluster with that same name exists in the destination library, but all the parameters of that cluster in here are completely identical to the one you're trying to import. So do you really want Newton to import that same cluster again, or should Newton assume that those clusters are identical and skip copying that cluster? You say yes. It says, oh, and the second link also exists, and it's the same cluster. Yes. And now it says, oh, okay, so you want to import this, but we already have one with that name, so give me a new name. We'll call it Chainlink 2. So now if I go up and open Chainlink 2, it's the same as Chainlink 1, or Chainlink. But however, you'll notice that if I go to my particle library, it didn't copy two more of these vertical links. We still only have two vertical links. So certainly, every time you import a library file, you don't want to be making unnecessary copies of all of these clusters. So it's smart enough to check that. Similarly, if I want to export this cluster, export sphere. Now, what if I export a couple other ones? Now I'll go back and I forgot that I had exported the sphere, and we try and export again. It won't do anything because it says, nope, I remember that I already exported this one. And it knows that this sphere is this sphere is the same as this one. If I had opened an external library that had a cluster named sphere, it would actually try to export this and say, "Hey, I think these are the same cluster." However, it knows that because I just exported this one, it knows that it's the identical sphere and doesn't even try to copy it again. So you basically never want to uncheck those boxes. Just always leave them checked and only use this for doing your merging. So I think that covers all of the file, the library, import, export, save as, and all of that. So if you have any other questions about the library that aren't covered in the manual, then go ahead and send us an email at info@actech.com. Thanks.